Hello, everybody. My name is Steve, and I'm here today with author Joseph Carroll. Joseph, how are you doing this morning?
Doing good. Glad to
Awesome.
be.
Yeah. I'm glad. Happy you accepted the invite, and I know we're always chatting back and forth on social media, and you're a big supporter of the channel, so I really appreciate you coming by to chat.
Yeah, I mean, just a bit, big fan of everything you do, and you know, I expect you to keep getting bigger and bigger because you seem like you're all over the place now. So
I'm all over the place. I'm not sure how well it goes, but thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it.
absolutely.
So your book, More Than a Vampire, and the first thing that struck me about the book is that cover. It's a great cover. I love that cover. So
I'm
how
glad.
did that cover come to be?
Um, well, with I was trying to, especially when you're an indie author, you're trying to do things, you know, you want to do something awesome, obviously. Like, oh, I want the best cover, but then you're like, okay, well, how much is it going to cost? Well, and then I was working with a local artist and had these grand plans of this, huge scape on the cover, and you know, and then after a while, I was like, these things just aren't going to work out. And then I was like, well, what can I do, where I can get the most bang for my buck? And then I started just looking around. I'm like, well, what do I like to, see on covers? And I love like pencil and ink art and black, and then I started thinking about, well, what would stand out? And that's how I got the black and white, look. And I was like, well, you know, there's a story behind yeah, there's a
Hmm.
story behind the cut on his hand. And I thought to myself, well, if I can just, have one spot right in the middle with just a little bit of color. But I was working with a guy named Matthew Allen Bond, and I just happened to just like, hey, does anybody know anybody who can, do pencil art? And he's like, he just jumped on my Twitter and he was like, oh yeah, check out some of my stuff. And I'm like, you know, I mean, his work is awesome. I guess he does graphic novels, or he's working on one right now. And we just went back and forth, and I just wanted to give. I mean, I had thoughts of what I wanted, but then I wanted him to have freedom to kind of do what he does. Since I liked his work. And he was like, "Oh, I really appreciate that," because a lot of times people want to critique, every certain thing. I'm not an artist, so all I had the hand, the sword, and I told him, the name and kind of what I wanted, and he came up with all the font, and he kept me in the loop and kept showing me, his progress on it. I was just like, I mean, I never expected to have it look as good as it does. And I'm glad you like it and other people have, you know, said that they did. But the biggest thing is I just wanted a custom cover. You know, I didn't want to just because you can go on sites and, pick covers or go on Fiverr and grab one. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that the story inside isn't amazing, but I feel like people can really feel when you have something that's been created just for your story.
Definitely, and I'm like you. Whenever there's an artist or somebody working on something, and just kind of let them. I don't want to get in their way, and
Yeah,
alter what they want, what their vision is. Kind of trust them and their ability.
yeah, I mean, and definitely, I mean, especially, I mean, if you like their work, then why would you try to come in and change the way they do stuff? And I didn't imagine that he would go to the level of detail he did with the border and everything, because that wasn't even. He's like, yo, you want me to just make a make a border for that too? And I was like, sure, yeah, good. He's like, oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, it was still, at least for my wallet, it was still a little expensive, but people think it was a lot. Like people who know how much cover art costs, think it was a lot more expensive than it actually was. But that's, you know, I tell everybody about him. If you're looking to get any, I mean, anything, you want a drawing or something for your website or whatever. I mean, but the guy's awesome. And once he got started on it, because he had other commissions, once he got started on it, it went pretty fast.
Hmm. Wow. So all this is hand drawn?
Yeah, yeah. Everything is completely custom on it. And even the spine and the font for the blurb on the back is all custom font that he created.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, for what I paid, I was like, I think I got a deal. So
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so much detail,
yeah,
especially in the border.
yeah. Everyone's telling me now that I have to keep him on for the future books, and that's kind of been a thing. I've kind of set this up. I'm like, well, if I'm gonna start this, I'm gonna go all the way and be, if I want the books to be linked, then I want the covers and spines and everything to kind of, because on BookTube I hear people all the time. They're like, oh, book 2 doesn't match book 3, so when I put them together, it looks horrible, and so I'm like, well, I'll try to not have that be a problem with my books. I'll just keep them all looking very similar.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, there's a lot of detail, and that it's really a striking cover, and that red on the cover really stands out. The blood off the hand.
Yeah, I was hoping that it wouldn't be like too much. I was thinking about even making a little less, but I think it turned out pretty good.
Oh yeah, looks really good. It's very striking, and it's when you're looking at books or there's some really great covers, but they all kind of blend together after a while. But this one, you see it stands out from the crowd for sure.
Yeah, and that was the big reason why I went with the ink art, because it just jumps out at you if you're going by and you're looking at all these paintings and then you see a really nice black and white one, you stop for a second. It's like, well, that's different.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
feel like it
Yeah.
has something to do with just the human eye, and black and white is always, you know, striking or whatever.
Yeah, especially when everything else is color and bright and glossy and these, attention grabbing colors, and then one isn't. It's like, well, what is it? What's that? It looks kind of different.
Yeah, and that's also why I went with a matte finish, because you get to choose whether you want glossy or matte, and that's why I chose to do it matte, because I just think it makes you look longer, and you're not like, glossy finishes. You're kind of like, it's almost like it's shiny, so you're kind of like, oh, okay, all right, I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
And
just
so
easier on the eye.
definitely, yeah, I do like. I'm a fan of matte finishes. It is easier. And so with the cover, you paid the artist for the cover, and it's a one time fee, or there are other fees involved later down the road.
No, it's I mean, I'm sure that you can work with artists and stuff, because I know like audiobooks and stuff like that, you can sign on like 50/50 agreements and stuff like that. But as far as the way I did, I just paid him. He just told me what it was going to be, and paid him on delivery. So
Nice.
I don't know if it was because we kind of talked back and forth or whatever, or I can see how some it might be, half up front and then halfway finished, but I didn't have to pay him until he delivered.
Nice. Yeah, it's a really great cover. So for the contents of the book, because the cover is it was the first thing that popped out at me, but the contents of the book, what is the book about? What can we expect from it?
Um, yeah, and I think this is probably the hardest thing for an author, is to be like, okay, what exactly is your book about? I you're following Simon, who is he's a vampire in the 1600s, and his job, he is a member of the Nigrum Gladio, which is a warrior sect for one of the four cabals in this world. And what he's basically tasked to do is to take down any vampires that kind of go rogue or just start randomly killing people, you know, because in this world you want to keep there all the supernatural predator out there. They want to kind of keep a low profile. It's kind of that historical thing where it's like, all right, well, we're more powerful than humans, but there are a lot more of them, and you know, how many ants does it take down a grasshopper type thing, you know? Um, so that's kind of his job, and then um, there's a big situation that's happening where cabals are changing locations, and he ends up meeting one of the liaison for one of the other cabals, the Mott cabal, and you know, falls in love with her, and then from there, uh, some big changes happen, and they kind of have to decide, which way they're going to go. Is he going to keep his loyalty to his cabal, or kind of secretly keep being with her? But in this kind of world, especially with these two cabals, the Echni and the Mac cabal, the leaders of this vampire sect, they do not like each other at all. They're rivals to an extent, but I guess without spoiling too much, because you can go to Amazon and do the look inside and see like the first 4 chapters. So it won't be too big of a spoiler to tell you that the way that the vampire cabals are set up, they were set up about 4,000 years ago, and and Dracula is the one who set everything up. But again, without spoiling too much, he wasn't the first vampire, but through means, he kind of eradicated most of the vampire society to create his own. And so he created 4 cabals all around the world to kind of, bring up his view of what vampires should be. And this is kind of where Simon has to kind of balance stuff. Working for one, you go to a different area, a different vampire cabal kind of rules, and you kind of have to watch your P's and Q's.
Nice. I'm a sucker for these kind of stories with the these societies that live in these worlds we don't see, and on all these political intrigue. And so, what were some inspirations for the story?
Well, whenever people are like, well, what's it like? And I tell people, I'm like, well, if you like the visuals and the kind of combat of the Witcher series, it has that feel. And if you like the writing style of the Dresden Files and the kind of humor that you kind of find inside the Dresden Files, it's mirrored with those two. But as far as like the political, then there is like, societal things and stuff, and that comes from the Underworld movies. I was just a huge fan of the way they did the Vampires and Werewolves, and their political system. I was like, well, if you just extrapolated that over everything, every mythology, and that's kind of how things work in this universe. Is what I'm creating is we're gonna hop, from character to character, and I'm gonna build characters up and kind of have them run into each other and stuff. And instead of having one just having a giant book and throwing a bunch of stuff inside of it, they're going to be a little bit shorter books, or at least shorter for fantasy books. And we're going to focus and we're going to focus on one character at a time. And sometimes, since a lot of characters are immortal or long lived, you're going to see a lot of these characters cross over, even if it's just just a short cameo to say hi or help out a character or something like that. It's like a kind of like a comic book world inside of a novel universe is kind of how I try to explain it to people.
Nice. And do you have, so you said it's a series. Do you know how many books will be in the series? Do you have it plotted out?
Um, well, if all goes well, I mean, there's going to be certainly there are going to be characters that'll have their own, um, maybe trilogies, or some of them may not make it. Not every not every story is a happy ending. But I already had the first 6 books plotted out, but again, they don't all follow one person.
Hmm.
Second book's already written, uh, and hopefully that'll be out in April. But I mean, I don't see, as long as I can keep going, I don't see a real end to the series. It's just gonna, we'll just kind of keep going like a comic book universe. We'll just kind of keep expanding it. Certain characters will have their ends, or they'll just kind of, they'll have their certain amount of books, and then they'll kind of maybe they'll fade off into the sunset if the story ends properly. But then other characters may just keep popping through the universe, and and I really think doing it this way, you know, people don't have to read every single book. And that's another like I'm gonna write them that way. Of course, certain books, will have direct kind of sequels, so you'll want to have read the first book. But for the most part, I feel like people will be able to kind of bounce in and out, and they'll get attached to certain characters, and that's really what I want. I want to become like the Stan Lee or the Todd McFarlane of novels. I want people to get really attached instead of like I'm reading Malazan now, and it's great. But for Steven Erikson, what he's, at least to me, what it seems like he's shooting for is just to make the biggest world that you could possibly build. I mean, he comes from a D&D background, so yeah. I mean, I'm in book 3, and it's like it's unbelievable the world that he's building. But when people talk about me, I want them to be like, oh yeah, Simon's my favorite character, or so and so is is my favorite character. Who's your favorite character from the More Than Human universe?
Oh,
That's where I want to get to.
oh, awesome. And you mentioned some comic book artists and writers. Are you a fan of comic books?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I was more into comic books, and like I said, Todd McFarlane. I used to collect Spawn comics
Okay.
when I was too young to actually that I should have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was what I was into when I was younger. Of course, watched all the Batman, the animated series, the X-Men, and I collected some X-Men when I could throw some change together and grab those up.
Yeah, I think it's during that whole time with the image boom of the '90s and how the shift, everything shifted in that industry, and it went from these artists being superstars, and now I think it's more writers who are the superstars, at least in that industry.
Yeah, 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 that seems to be the way we're going. And I watch a lot of comic book stuff, comic book explained and stuff like that. And that's all you hear is oh, this writer's coming on to come back and do the X-Men, or their MCU's now working with the writer from the original. And so yeah, I think when Todd made Image Comics, and he just siphoned off all the great artists, because I feel like the artists were getting the shaft back then. And but yeah, I think writers are coming back around to being the stars of comics and movies and stuff.
Yeah, they can make or break the franchise, and it's just really the shift that happened during that time is really interesting. The way the comic books shifted, and you had mentioned vampires and being a fan of the underworld movies, and we'll talk more about movies here in a bit. But For vampires, I noticed during your conversation with Philip Chase that you had mentioned you read or reread Carmilla and Dracula and Frankenstein.
Yes.
How did those influence your story in your book?
Well, as far as this story, now of course I've watched the original Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I've just been a huge fan of vampires in general, and I love the mythology behind them, and Europe, where people they used to bury I get it wasn't as prevalent as some of the myths, but where they would bury people with bells and stuff in case they the whole undead thing. And and in this book, once you get into it, you'll know that I love Eastern European mythologies and stuff like that. So vampires were right up my alley, and Vlad Dracul, I've watched every biopic on him. But as far as like Carmilla and Dracula, I actually didn't read those until after I was probably right around the time that I was getting ready to publish the book. But I just wanted to kind of start getting into some of the classics and seeing where everything kind of came from. So I had heard that Carmilla was the inspiration for Dracula. So I read that first, and that story, it is so crazy. That story is from 1876, because almost every vampire thing that you can think of is at least referenced in that book. It's super short book too. It's more like a novella than an actual novel. And then when I went on to Bram Stoker's, you can definitely see where he was influenced by that. But also he kind of did some things on his own, and a lot of people don't realize is, vampires weren't killed by the sun, and like like you see nowadays. And also in my book, that's a big thing too. Is I try to keep my like the things that people love about vampires, the base of what a modern day vampire is. I try to keep that and I try to keep that with most of the creatures that I use. Is like, well, why just blow something up? I know people want to create their own thing, but people like vampires because they like the way that they've seen them throughout the years. But so I wasn't trying to create a whole new the strain, vampire or whatnot. But I did want to, because I'm a big nerd whenever it comes to like reading or movies. I see something, I'm like, I see that they did something a certain way or they said something. I was like, well, is that real? Would that actually work or something? And then I go look it up on the internet, because that's just how weird I am. But I wanted to kind of put that into my book for people like me. So of course there's always gonna be a little bit of magic surrounding vampires, but most of what my vampires can do is biological based. There's some kind of inherent reason, and I try to give explanations for why they can sneak up on people, and why they can, glamour, people. There's I use and I in the book I'll use examples from nature, certain plants, or certain animals that do things in nature, and to kind of give a more realistic view of what these vampires are doing to people, or why they're so strong or fast, or you know. But again, with the daylight, um, my vampires, they are able to be in sunlight, but it does kind of drain their energy, kind of in a similar way to Moonlight. If you ever watched that series from like 10, 15 years ago.
I don't think I did.
Yeah, it came on during the writer's strike, so it got killed. It got killed off pretty quick. but it was a solid show. But yeah, it kind of slowly drains them of energy and uh, makes them more feral, I guess you would say.
Hmm. And whenever I talk to my reading friends about a book or about a vampire book, the first question they always ask me is, "Are the vampires sparkly?"
uh, well, and I'm not gonna be one of these people that just completely hates on Twilight, but yeah, the vampires in here. I mean, some of them, it's like its own civilization. So,
Mhm.
you know, some of them are going to be the suave type, and others are going to be barbarians and just ruthless. And they also can get to the point where, bordering on, 30 Days of Night, depending on, what mindset they get into. So you get a little bit, because they're vampires, werewolves. They're considered, they don't consider themselves paranormal or anything. They consider themselves predators. They call themselves super predators. They kind of came in, um, and this is really isn't spoilery, but vampires, werewolves, and some handful of other things came into existence because uh, nature kind of brought them into existence because humans started, getting outside of the food chain, really. I mean,
Hmm.
we really don't get hunted by anything anymore. I mean, even when we're out in the wild, we have guns, we can build shelters, we can get inside a car. Um, and in this world, Mother Nature doesn't like that. So to keep them inside, to keep humans inside of the food chain, so to speak, viruses and you know mutations kind of happen to keep humans in check.
Oh,
So
I
that's
like that.
that's kind of how vampires and werewolves and some other things came about.
Oh, I like that. That's a good idea.
But yeah, they don't sparkle though. No, there's no shiny glitter on them because I have a glitter phobia, so I couldn't do that.
Yeah. And it's funny that how versatile vampires are because you can use them in so many different ways, and the
Oh
way
yeah,
that they've changed so much over it seems like every generation has a different view or a different idea of what a vampire is, and it seems like it switched from being these monsters over the years to being more romanticized, and instead of it being something to be afraid of, it's like, well, I want to go to prom with this vampire. So
yeah.
where do you fall on that? What when someone says vampire in your mind, where does your mind go? What's your kind of standard? What fits into that box?
Yeah. So if someone just walks up to me and says vampire, first thing that pops into my mind, again, I go to Underworld. That's the first thing that pops into my mind is just, immortal beings that feed on humans, and kind of care less technically about us as long as we're around for them to feed on. They don't care about us. They're their own thing. They're trying to, you know, kind of the way Magneto feels about humans. That's kind of the way I feel like if vampires were real, that would be how they would feel about us.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh, but like, you said you were gonna read Carmilla, right? You haven't got into it yet.
I haven't. I didn't even know about it until we read Dracula. I didn't know that it was written before 26 years before
Yeah,
Dracula. So I didn't even know about it. But yeah, I plan to read it eventually. It's just hard to keep up.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you got a lot of things going on, so um, just read your TBR and whatnot. But yeah, in Carmilla, I'm not gonna spoil anything for you, but it seems like back then vampires were the boogeyman. That's kind of, and even in Dracula, came like 26 years later. It was still closer to that, closer to like a boogeyman type character, but even with Bram Stoker, you can see the evolution from Carmilla and how once people got a hold, because that was I feel like that was the first vampire book that really blew up. Because there had been vampire stories since the mid 1800s, early 1800s. But yeah, I think once Bram Stoker came out, people just kind of ran with that, and it just kind of evolved more human, more human, more human.
Hmm.
And uh, and then I think once you got to Interview as a Vampire was the next step in that, and then I think after that, people either decided they were going to go the extreme. So we got to Twilight, and then we got to 30 Days a Night. Like you got the people who wanted to keep them horror after that, and then you wanted people that wanted to make them romantic, more romantic after that.
Yeah. There's just so much you can do with that archetype. There's so many directions you can go, and even with Underworld, I think what they did in those movies, well, some more successful than others, but I thought the society and this war between vampires and werewolves and all the political intrigue that was going on there too, and all the way that the elders would go through time, I thought that was really neat. I mean, there's so many cool things they did with it.
Yeah, I thought that was. I mean, that was pretty original. I hadn't seen that in any other aspect, and I think around the time Underworld came out, maybe a little bit before that, is when you know people started kind of, and there was a little bit of that in Dracula, but the big thing I think people like when you start to think about like vampire societies is, well, they're basically, they look like humans for the most part, so they can kind of get away with coming in and out of our society and kind of using it, and seeing as how they're immortal, they can amass this great wealth. And I think that was the big thing that kind of the underlying thing in Underworld is like you have these rivals, but they're super ancient, super wealthy, so they're riding around on their private trains, and
Yeah.
but I kind of I like that aspect and Dresden does that well too. I don't know how. I mean, I know you're into Dresden, right? Are you current?
No, I haven't read Dresden yet.
Oh, I thought I heard you talk about Dresden at some point, but Dresden does that well too, where all the supernatural entities. I mean, they're all basically super wealthy because they've been around for thousands of years, and I think that's a big aspect whenever you're writing a book with creatures and gods and stuff like that. It's like, well, why if a god is thousands of years old, you know why would they live in a shack still? It's like,
Yeah.
you would think they would have at least robbed enough people to have a decent place over the years, or killed enough people with money in their pockets.
Yeah, you'd figure that you have a lot of chances to amass some kind of wealth. Yeah, for sure. And with your books, what made you decide to write this book or start writing and publish?
Well, when I was in high school, I used to write all the time, just random little short stories, um, and then I wrote a short story, a group of short stories, which almost, I mean, I actually ended up finding it in my high school book bag like a year ago. I was when we moved. I'm like, is that my book bag from high school? But yeah, it's almost the length of a novel. I mean, it's between the three stories, it's like 50,000 words or something like that. But and that's where Simon came from, the main
Hmm.
character here. He was just a side villain character, uh, one of the handful of villains that were in the story. And I just thought to myself, it's like, well, I love vampires, so how could I incorporate him in, and why? And I love origin stories. I think most people do. I think that's. But I thought, well, how did he get to where he is? Now, again, nobody's going to get to read that original story, so they're not going to see what kind of character in that story. But I just wanted to kind of see what kind of what reason I could pull down for him to kind of go that way and go into a darker path. Um, and this book is dark fantasy with you know, bits and pieces of horror, kind of mixed horror with epic fantasy mixed in. So I just wanted to create a world where, you know, when this is what I tell people, especially with video games too. It's like there was a big push in the you know, early 2000s, like, oh, video games are so violent and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I mean, the studies show that it doesn't make kids be any worse or whatever. Um, but I just want things to be real. Like, don't censor yourself, you know, with, you know, fight. I know, and in like YA, it's almost like whenever they do fight scenes, it's like, it cuts away, you know, before, oh, and oh, he died. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. But I'm also not being in here, I'm not being gory to just be gory. I mean, you know, most people seem to think of the fight scenes are pretty well done out, and the way I the way I make them out is I kind of close my eyes and then I kind of visualize myself in there like a movie.
Hmm.
How would it look on the screen? And I go from there, and you know, however it ends, it ends. You know, if someone's getting stabbed through the heart, you know, if they're getting half their face cut off or whatever it happens to be. I just try to, because people can sense if you're purposely, you know, kind of, you know, censoring yourself. So I
Yeah.
kind of try not to do that at all, and just kind of make it as real and as raw as I can.
Nice. And you know, all my non-horror friends or people I know who don't enjoy horror always ask, what's the appeal of reading stories like that or watching horror movies? What is the appeal for you?
Um, I think you know, with books and especially movies, um, we live in, like, this is the safest time in human history. I mean, whatever you want to believe on the news, there, go back 300 years and see how safe you felt back then. You know, um, but yeah, I think it gives us that like, because we live such a cozy life. We want to be. There's something inside of you that your body still wants to be up and, you know, ready to fight or ready to run. And I think you know, horror movies and horror books kind of give you that sense of like, everything's not nice and fluffy around here. You know, like as you're reading the book, or you're like, oh, you kind of start looking behind you, or like the first. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I watched. I mean, it's stupid now, but when Blair Witch Project first came out, it was pretty creepy. Especially, I don't know, maybe I was 12, 13 years old when it came out, and I'm watching it in the dark, and no one's in the house, and I'm like, you know, I, you know, and I think it's almost like the same reason people ride roller coasters. You know, they want that
Hmm.
thrill of, oh, I might die. You know, you're not going to, obviously, but you want that thrill and that excitement of, oh, there's something around the corner.
Yeah,
Keeps
it's yeah.
life interesting.
And Blair Witch Project. It was what they did with that movie was just brilliant. The way that they marketed it and
Ah,
they made it seem like it was a real you know,
yeah,
yeah, that was blazed trails for so many more movies over the years, and it was so brilliant what they did with it.
yeah. I think what was the because I'm like a stat nerd, and there was something about, I think they spent like $250,000 on the movie and it made like 250 million. Is like the biggest disparity of box office to budget of all time.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, that the marketing, and I think Paranormal Activity kind of followed that too. They went like did like their own viral marketing, and but I don't
it's
know
tougher to fool people now.
with a lot of their stuff.
Yeah, it's tough now to fool people just because
Oh yeah,
you know. Yeah, so but you're right. It does sound silly now, but back when it was released and no, you know, we didn't really know it was that movie had me too. But you know,
yeah,
it sounds silly, but at the time, you know,
yeah. Yeah, back then there was still this notion of like a tape could be found. You know, there was a lot of those kind of weird, you know, like The Ring, and you know, all these like, oh, don't watch this video. This video was from the 80s, and people do stuff. You know, there was a Netflix horror movie that came out. It it was either a movie or it was in an anthology, but there was something along those lines of, oh, this movie was released in the 70s and it's subliminally in there, make people kill everybody or whatever, you know. But yeah, I mean, back in the 90s, you felt like that could still happen because, you know, weird, like technology was changing. And there were still VHS tapes, but, you know, you had, you know, DVDs and everything was starting to come around, and you're like, oh, is there something weird about that old technology?
Yeah, yeah, it becomes this creepy, you know, this older, you know, outdated media that has these powers now. That's interesting. Yeah, I never thought of that about cassette tape. You know, it's how often is it you watch this YouTube video and you'll die in 24 hours, or it would never happen.
Yeah, yeah. But I love stuff like that. And you know, kind of, and I think a big thing over the last 5 years has been kind of movies trying to touch into your nostalgia. You know, with the 80s, now they're trying to do the 90s. Like there's a series that's Netflix picked up recently, it's called like VHS, and it's a collection of short horror, you know, movies. And now they got one that they bought the rights to it or whatever and made like VHS 1994. Like, so I think the 90s is coming back now.
Yeah, I think it's what, a 30-year cycle. I think they say every 30 years we kind of look back and get nostalgic about the 90s, you know, whatever decade it was. But yeah, I think another thing is with horror movies, I think it's easier to go back to that time because there was no cell phones. So now
Yeah.
you put people in these awkward positions, and you have to, there's always that, well, just call someone for help. So you have to have a reason why no one's cell phone works in modern movies. So if you base it in the 80s or 90s, the mid 90s, then people having a cell phone really wouldn't happen. So it's easier to say, well, they couldn't call anyone because it's 1989 and there's no phones.
Yeah, you can get away with a lot more stuff. Yeah, in the 80s and like I said, early 90s. I don't I don't know if there was something about like I don't know if it was Seinfeld or Friends. They said like 90% of the episodes would have been over in 2 minutes had they had cell phones. Like, you know, just because like everyone has and that's another thing too. It's like, you know, with monster movies and so it's harder to do a good monster movie now because it's like, well, of course people are going to see it. Everybody has a camera. If something weird happens, people are pulling their cameras out immediately. And um, but I mean, you know, they're still creating some like me and my wife just went and seen Antlers. Oh, God, that was the best monster movie in a long time.
Really?
Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, I was definitely glad to see it in theaters for sure. Um, but you had movies like that, and then oh man, there was a movie that was set over in Sweden.
Hmm.
That was kind of your, you know, monster type movie too. It was pretty similar. You maybe some it could have been some kind of Wendigo or some kind of weird Scandinavian monster.
Hmm.
It was good, and they've been coming out with great movies. I don't know if different like you were talking with somebody from Iceland, I think,
Hmm.
not long ago. And I think like Scandinavian areas are becoming a big place to put movies now because I've been seeing a lot of good Midsummer and you know
Hmm.
all the movies are coming out from you know Sweden, Norway, and um, you know I think that's becoming a hot place to set things. I don't know if it has to do with the Norris culture or you know a lot of places around there still believe in fairies and whatnot. So I don't I don't know if that's a thing, but I think it's awesome because I mean I grew up on Beowulf and you know all those you know mythologies. I'm into all that, and as you go through the book, you'll see that I try to bring you know I didn't want to be super cliche and bring in all these mythologies or creatures or characters that everybody knows because
Hmm.
then and that's been the big thing for me is like, this isn't fan fiction, you know, so I didn't want it to come across that way just by putting everything everybody knows. Of course, there's going to be characters and certain creatures that everybody's going to know, but then there's also going to be um, you know, characters and creatures that maybe a few thousand people over in Romania might know about,
Yeah.
or certain tribes in North America might know about certain characters. Um, and actually, one of my beta readers for this book, uh, they were watching it, and they were reading it, and they were just like, "It's amazing that you put this in," because she's First Nation, and she was just like, this is great. I've never seen this in a fantasy book. It was, you know, and and that's kind of what I'm trying to do is bring bring little known, you know, folklore um, to as many, you know, hopefully to the masses someday, but you know, to, you know, fantasy readers where, you know, because it seems like, and yeah, this is set in Europe, but it also we go to we go to North America in the 17th century.
Hmm.
Um, so you're going to see a lot of mythologies and stuff from over here, and a lot of Native American culture is throughout this book, and probably throughout a lot of my books. You're going to see that just because that's I think their culture has so many folklores and mythologies that you could just keep going and you would never run out of ideas.
Yeah, there's a ton of folklore and mythologies, and it varies so much in different parts of other parts, even just in this country, different parts of the country, and different tribes have their own different superstitions or their, you know, yeah, there's a ton of storytelling that can be had there. And with your storytelling, what is your process to tell a story?
Well, I'm a character reader, so uh, you know, first for if a book's going to be one of my favorite books of all time, it's got to have an amazing character like Geralt or Harry Dresden. Those are two of my favorite, and the Dark Tower is up there too. You really have to uh, make me care about the characters. So
Mm.
when I first start writing a story, uh, it's not necessarily about the setting. It's like, okay, what kind of character do I want to write? And then once I decide what type of character I'm going to write, then it's about the set. Then it goes to the setting. It goes to, okay, what time frame are we putting this in? And as soon as I have those two things, I think I get the first line in my head, or the first scene is, you know, comes into my head, and then I don't, you know, I don't know why it works this way, but as soon as I see the first scene and I know what the character, what type of character they are, I automatically see the end of the book or the end of the story.
Mm.
See how, you know, how this is going to end, and that be, you know, because I kind of know what type of story I want to tell. So as soon as I have the first, I can end it, and I try. Hopefully, once you read this, you'll hopefully have succeeded. A lot of people tend to like the, well, hate like the ending, maybe, depending, depending on your review, but mostly positive reviews from the end. But um, I, Stephen King's more about, he always says it's about the journey. You know, a lot of people hate on his end. Not all his endings were bad, but um, you know, a lot of people tend to hate on his endings, and he even kind of mentions that throughout the, you know, when he goes meta sometimes. But he'll just be like, you know, it's all about the journey. Well, you know, the journey's fine, but you got to have. To me, I want to be paid off. I
Hmm.
want to. I mean, my book's not really that long, but you know, if you're going to sit down and you're going to give me, you know, as an author, you're going to give me 3 4 hours of your time or whatever. I want it to be worth it at the end.
Yeah.
Uh, so, you know, I always want to have an impactful ending. And then, once I have the beginning and the end, then I, especially with this book, I had like 6 or 7 places that I wanted him to go and people that I wanted him to meet. So I kind of
Hmm.
kind of point those out through, and then I just and then after that, I'm kind of like a pantser. I just kind of I don't do a lot of outlining or a lot of plotting. I mean, I'm not like Sanderson where I got 200 pages of notes before I. I'm like, you wrote a book before you wrote the book, man. Like, uh, I watch a lot of his stuff too, and I try to learn. I mean, because I mean, you can feel yourself getting better. From the when I first wrote the first word to the last word, and then as I've already finished the second book, and I feel like I'm so much better at at description and show don't tell and stuff.
Hmm.
But also inside of that, I don't ever plan on having a book be even if I have this a big crossover event with a bunch of different characters. I don't feel like I would ever make a book that's too far past 100,000 words.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, just because um, I don't know myself. I mean, I'm reading Malazan right now, so
Yeah.
short is out of my vocabulary right now. But I just feel like I want people to. I don't want to intimidate anybody.
Hmm.
I want everybody. I want my books to be accessible because I know, like I said, I just started getting into. I was mostly for the first, you know, 25 years of my life, I was all movies, and now I've started, getting into books. But I would have never picked up a, you know, 800-page book when I was 18 years old. No way. I would have looked at that and be like, "You crazy? Like
It's a doorstep. Yeah.
I'm gonna be here forever." You know.
Yeah.
So and another, I mean, I've read some great books that are really really long, but I just want to be accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I want everybody, and in my writing style too. And I've talked with some people, and it would be hard for me. I'm not Erickson, so I don't. It would be hard for me to write in the old style prose
Hmm.
to with. But also, again, I want to make it accessible for people who are transitioning into, fantasy or coming into adult fantasy. I want it to be, easily able to be read as well. I mean, I did do research and stuff to make sure all the all the words I was using were words from the 1600s, but I didn't go out of my way to make the voice of the book be very, it's not archaic. You
Hmm.
know, you know, you're not going to be lost with anything, even if I use, even if there is a $10 word in there every once in a while, it's not out of anyone's vocabulary.
I think that's important too, and it always fascinates me with writers, especially because you spend all this time planning and writing and editing and research and fine tuning and beta reading and this long process to get your book, and then you get it ready for publishing. When you hit that publish button, what was that feeling like?
Nervous. I was, it was, I was super, super excited uh, because it's always been a dream of mine, but it kind of sat on the back burner for almost 2 decades, really. When I was in high school, I used to write, like I said, I wrote all the time. And then it just kind of became something you start working and you forget, your passions kind of, go away as you're trying to get a house and pay for your car payments and everything. Um, but then once I got back into it, you know, it, and we got to that point, it was like, all right, well, I hope, I've had some people read the book and mostly positive reviews, but you're always worried, first and foremost, you're worried that your story's not going to be good. Then, it becomes like, well, is anybody going to read it?
Yeah.
uh, so, I hope, I have mostly positive reviews. And again, and when I talked with Philip, we talked about, you know, the editing's not perfect on it. So and that's a big thing I think for authors. And you were talking about this the other day about authors coming on and talking to YouTubers and shouldn't they and
Mm.
um, I mean I love interacting with you guys on here and on other YouTube channels, but also you have to be able to take criticism. It's just
Mm.
it's like most of the time, especially and like you or any of the people that I mean, I don't follow people that I think are just a-holes. Like, so anybody that I follow, if they were to say anything about the book, they're like, oh, this needs work or that needs work, I'm like, oh, sometimes some of it I know, some of it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know the editing was a little rough, and that'll be the next thing to work on. But if I get any feedback on any other things, I mean, that's why I do beta readers. I
Mm.
try to do as many of those as I can, and I take the criticism. I'm like, okay, the pacing's off. Well, okay, I'll try to sharpen that up, or what this character did doesn't make sense. I'm like, all right, yeah, we'll go back and we'll kind of mold that out and flesh it out. I just think authors who get on and if they do go too far, I just think it's an insecurity thing. Sometimes they think they're the best thing since sliced bread and they can do no wrong. I've heard that. I've heard that online too. From a book that was supposed to be really, was supposed to have a lot of hype behind it, and she got like a some lady. I don't know the name, but she got a 4-star review and she freaked out. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
I hope all my, if I get all four, I've got a hand, I've got mostly, good reviews right now, but a 4-star review, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not, especially if you're not Stephen King, where, people just read anything you put out, and love it most of the time, and even if I got a 3-star review, I'm like, okay, tell me what you didn't like, and we'll try to get better, because that's what it's all about. As once you get into writing, it's like, why wouldn't you want people to tell you what you're not doing? You don't need a bunch of yes men and yes women around you. You need people who are going to tell you how to get better.
Yeah. It's not always an easy pill to swallow either. I think you have to be open to it and accept that constructive criticism. Of course, you don't have to be nasty about it. Just hey, I think this could be tightened up or that could be a little bit better, and it helps you. And I like the interaction. I think, well, obviously, but I like the back and forth and the to go back and forth and talk about things. And if you can go back to when you first started writing and you could give yourself a piece of advice, what would you tell yourself?
Don't stop. That's I thought about that a lot, um, and that's been and it's hard when you do that, when you start looking back and then you get into the what ifs, and then
Mm.
that'll, especially me, maybe it's just me, but that drives me nuts when I start, you start, well, if you just kept writing your story, and you didn't stop, how many books should you have out by now? You know, I I could have, and that's another reason I went the indie publishing route, is because I didn't want to wait, because a lot of times I've heard, even if they accept you, from the time they accept you to the time you get published, sometimes it's 2, 4 years. And I mean, not that I'm old, I'm still in my early 30s, but I didn't want to wait till I'm
Yeah.
35, 36 years old, um, to get my book out. And plus, I wanted control over everything. Um, but you go back and, well, I could have been traditionally published by now. I could have all of these books out, and but then I also come back to myself and I'm like, well, your stories wouldn't have been what they are now, because you hadn't read the books you've read, you didn't have the life experiences you did, and I'm kind of a sappy person for things happen for a reason. I don't, you know, so that's kind of the way I've lived my life. It's like, you know, you have something bad happen, just keep grinding, just keep going forward, and eventually you'll get to where you want to go. Um, but yeah, I would just tell my younger self, just keep writing, man. Don't stop, and create your world. But I feel good. I feel good about where I'm at now, and I have a long long-term plan of where I want this whole universe to go. So we're starting beta readers on book 2 now, and I'll start writing. That's the only bad thing about once I start writing in January, I pretty much will have to cut out my reading. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get through as much Malazan as I can before for the new year when and I normally try to give myself, because I write every single day once I start. Um, and the this book, it took me from the beginning. I wrote for 114 days straight to get the first draft down, and then the second book, I put myself down for I wanted to do it in 100 days, and it took me 79 days
Oh
to
wow.
write this. Now the second book is about 10,000 words less, so about 80,000 words. But that's kind of what I'm going to keep myself at. I'm going to put myself at about 100 days to write. But to do that, that's got to be the only thing I focus on. So so once I go from that, then I'll about 3.5 months, and then I'll get back into reading. So,
It's hard to find the time to do everything you want to do. It's tough.
oh, well, and that's the big thing. When I first got on Twitter, that was the biggest thing. When you start interacting with the writing community, is people like, well, where do you find the time at, and this and that, and honestly, I use my phone to write 90% of everything I
Hmm.
do. I use Google Docs, and I'll write, or I'll do voice to text to do it. Just because, I mean, I always tell people, and this is not just with writing, but with anything in general, people reading or just having a hobby, people like, well, there's no time. There's no time to do anything. And I'm like, I mean, if it's something you really want to do, you'll find the time to do it. I mean, at one point I was writing this book, coaching my son's football team, and then working 10, 12 hours a day, you know. So it's just, if it's important, you'll find time. I mean, most of my stories are written in my mail truck. You know,
Yeah.
kind of kind of how I do it is like we uh in the post office, when you're out, you're walking, they call them loops. You park and then you do a loop, and normally it takes 15 minutes to do. So, and maybe this helps me more than other people who can just sit down, because sometimes I envy those people who have time to sit down for 3 hours and just write. But I so I go and I start walking and delivering the mail, and in my head I'm thinking, all right, this is what I want to write. This is the next scene, and then I get back, and then I have 30 seconds, a minute, or whatever to get to my next stop, and I'm either just talking into the phone or typing it out real quick, and then I do it all again. 15 minutes to think about what I want to write. And the one thing I do think that helps me is um, when I go back and I self edit, I don't have to do a ton of self editing. Like, I know people, and this was shocked me, and when you first start writing and you first think that you're going to be like, I want to become an author, um, Twitter can be a crazy place, because you get on there and someone's like, and I I started like in November, so I got in at like NaNoWriMo.
Oh yeah.
People were like, "Oh yeah, I just did 5,000 words today." I'm like, "You did what? You did 5,000 words in one day?" Uh, like my when I was writing More Than a Vampire, the best day I ever had was 1,800 words in a day. That was the best I had ever done. So I'm like, I feel like you almost feel lesser than. You're like, God, do I suck? Like, I am not very good at, or at least my speed is terrible. But and then the more you get into it, the more you realize, well, a lot of these people that put down thousands of words a day, they erase half or more than half of everything that they do, because they're
Hmm.
just every idea just throwing it on the page. And I mean, like I said, I do some, I have to do editing, but I try to not put anything in my stories that I don't believe in. I'm not like, and maybe it's because I do have that 15 minutes or 20 minutes between writing where it's like, okay, do you really want to put that in there? Or it really gives me time to flush it out. But, whenever I'm writing, I feel comfortable if I get 1,000 words in a day. That's what I shoot for. I know some people that don't write, and I try to do it every day. And that's a big thing I tell any writers who are watching this. It's like, and I don't write every day unless I'm trying to write a book. But once I do that, if that's your goal, if you want to become published and you want other people to read, you probably should be, working, even if you only get a couple hundred words in, put something on the page every day towards the story that you want to tell. I know other writers who are like, oh, I'm working on 5 books. And I'm like, oh, are you, do you want anyone to read these books? Like, how long is it going to take you if you're not writing, especially if you're not writing every day, and then you're trying to sparse your time out between 5 different, I mean, maybe other people can do it, but I don't have the multitasking ability to do that. So I just, and I have kind of an addictive personality. When I was younger, I used to get into video games and time could just disappear. I look at the clock and I've been on the game for 5 hours. So I kind of put that into my writing. It's just like, all right, once you get into it, you're in it every day. And, but, I would love, I've had 2,000 word days now, but that's when I've had a lot of time to write. And I have my best friend Nathan. He's trying to write a story right now, and he thinks I'm like some like writing god or something. He's like, man, you've basically written 2 books in a year, and they're not super long books, but and I'm just like, well, I'm not like this crazy writing machine. I write something every day, and eventually it adds up. I mean, I'm not like Sanderson where I'm writing 5,000. I think he writes 8 hours a day. So he's probably putting 4 or 5,000 words up every single day. Or Stephen King writes like six. He writes like 6 to 10 pages every single day. But I guess there's levels to it. If people think, some people who are just starting out might think that I'm prolific or whatever, but when there are people who are putting out 400,000 word books every year, I mean, those are the people that I'm looking at. Like, I don't know how you have the time.
It's insane, yeah. And it's funny you mentioned multitasking and doing all these different things at once. And I think you came from the same, because we're close in age. I think the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years, the big push was multitask, do more things at once, multitask. And there's all these studies now about how when you multitask, the result isn't good. It's better to focus on a task at a time instead of spreading yourself over 3 or 4 tasks.
Well, I think over the last 100 years, we've become like, hyper focused. We've become focused on, productivity and just doing more things. Like, oh, get as much done all over the place, and we've forgotten a lot of the, and this is another thing why I love mythology. It's like in most mythologies and most folklores, they were created to teach you something. There's don't do this, or this monster comes and gets you, and you're like, oh, well, that's just goofy superstition. But you're like, yeah, but you probably shouldn't do what the monster was going after. There's a reason that they created these things, and like, for what you just said, I mean, what's the old adage? Jack of all trades, master of none. If you try to be great at everything, you're probably not going to be good at anything. And that's just starting to come back around where it's like, focus. If you're good at something, focus on that. And I think that's the people that you're finding that are becoming successful are those people who maybe they only have one, you might look at them and be like, man, you really only, you only do one thing. You're only like, do you not have, more skills or more interests? But you look at them like, well, they're pretty successful because they
Yeah.
found what they're good at. They like, and normally if you're naturally good at something, you tend to like doing that thing. And if you keep going with it, you're every skill somebody needs somewhere. So if you're the
Mm.
best at that or one of the best, you're gonna make money, you're gonna be successful, and if you are if you make money and you're successful and you're doing what you like, normally you have a good life, So I think that's gonna be, especially when you were probably had to go through it too, but we were in middle school and high school, the big thing was you have to go to college, you have to go to a traditional college, and that's
Mm.
why our generation is so far in debt. I mean, I never did. I actually never did that because I got straight into management, and I worked my way up pretty quick. So I don't have any school debt, but they're starting to push the trade schools now. Go learn a skill now instead of just go and put yourself in debt. Of course, you're not sure if that's what you want to do. Once you get to college, I know a lot of my friends were just like they had no idea what they were had no idea what they were doing. They're just like, I'm here. Still don't know what I want to do with my life, but I took out $40,000 in loans, for
Yeah.
this good university. But
Yeah. It's
yeah,
wild. That's how things change over the years.
well, and then and another thing I think for people, I think they need, whatever your job happens to be, I think you have to have a hobby.
Mm.
You have to do something, you know, I mean, and you can involve your family in it too, but I definitely think you have to have something for you that gives you a little bit of fulfillment outside of your work or outside of your day-to-day, life. I don't know if it's YouTube for you. You seem to have a lot of fun with it, so maybe that's your hobby too, and that's kind of what got me back into writing. It's you get in this mode of you feel like you're on a treadmill where you're just I'm running every day, but I'm not going anywhere. And
Yeah.
and once I started writing again, you kind of get that you kind of you get all that anxiety kind of goes away and you get out of your own head and you're like you know especially with the way I write and I want to create characters and create worlds and it gives me that outlet. So when I am writing, I am super focused. So I do focus in on it, and that's the one thing I'm doing. But it's so enjoyable. You're
Mm.
just like, okay, this is other than just throwing mail in a box every day, or delivering packages to somebody's door. It's like, this is what I am. So this is, I want to, I want to keep going and like I said, I want to do about 2 books a year. That's going to be my goal. 2 books, and they should be between 75,000 and 100,000 words. So maybe 250 pages to 350 pages. Uh, and I'd like to say, you know, here in a few years, I'd like to be able to be like, oh, what do you do? I was like, well, I'm an author and I carry mail on the side.
Yeah.
So that's the goal. That's the goal.
That's the dream. Yeah. That's what it's all about. And you mentioned having an outlet and having something that you do on your own outside of work. And I did, and if I read or you had discussed you and your wife being big horror movie fans. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you what your top 5 horror movies are.
Oh, oh,
That's the tough questions here.
I'll be here all day. When I was uh when I was in high school, I started a list of my 100 greatest movies of all time, and it became like an ongoing thing over the years. My friend Nathan will pop in every once in a while. He's like, "Hey, have you redone one of those?" So I love lists, but my top five horror movies of all time. Um, some people, um, some people might not consider this like traditional horror, but and I don't know if I'm putting this out, I'm gonna put this out of order here, but the original Saw was, I seen it in theaters the opening day, and I don't know why. I was just like, oh, well, weird something to do because I used to go see movies every weekend, and the ending to that movie, like everybody in the audience was like, everyone lost our minds. Like I'm like, if anybody tells me they knew how this movie was going to end, you're lying.
Yeah.
uh, but like Saul's definitely up there, and then I mean, I love the slashers from the '80s. The original Friday the 13th was awesome, and then the Nightmare on Elm Streets. Those were more scary uh, than the Jason movies. But I grew up on those. Um, oh man, God, so many. And like I said, like Antlers. Antlers is the best monster horror movie that's came out in a long time. I love the Conjuring movies. Um, the last one was I think that they might be going downhill, but and a underrated two underrated movies, and some people might put them in as sci-fi, but I'd say they're sci-fi horror is The Fourth Kind,
Mm-hmm.
and then Dark Skies.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and Dark Skies was the scariest aliens ever in cinema history. I mean, it was, you know, my
Dark,
wife, we're in the theater and my wife is freaking out.
Dark Skies. I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, it's kind of a alien abduction type of movie.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, you barely ever see the aliens. And when you do, it's kind of boogeyman type deal. But yeah, we're in the theater with 100 people around us, and my wife is like up in my shoulder and everything. I'm like, because for her, aliens are the scariest thing. Like
Yeah.
the Fourth Kind, like we were trying to rewatch it with my friend and his fiance because they uh my friend had seen it, but he didn't really remember it. His fiance has never seen it. We were trying to watch it. My wife was still freaking out. I'm like, you've seen this movie, you know how it goes. And she was just like, I can't stand aliens. But I mean, there's been some you we call them like B level movies, but there's one called The Tunnel,
Hmm.
and it's from Australia, and it is really good. Um, they go down. There's these tunnels under. I don't know if it's under Sydney or Melbourne, one of the big cities, but they were having water shortages, and they were talking about going into the tunnels under the city, and there's all this
Hmm.
water that's just kind of collected there, and they want to pump it up or something. And so these reporters go down there, and craziness ensues.
Hmm.
It's kind of a found footage type deal. But that's what we over the last couple of years, me and my wife, anytime we see anything found footage movie, we're like, all right, we're in. Like some people hate it, that they're like, oh, it's so shaky and the camera and everything, but uh, we kind of enjoy it. Sometimes they're goofy um, but there's been a lot, you know, and I've even tried to watch like the classic Psycho and The Birds. I remember watching two movies. I don't know why, but when I was like 4 years old, I remember watching The Birds, and it freaked me out. Um, Arachnophobia was, I mean, I think Arachnophobia gave me arachnophobia.
Yeah.
And then the original It. I
Oh
was
yeah.
years old when I watched that movie, and that was a terrible idea for my parents to let me watch that movie. That is a terrible idea. I remember that movie scaring me. I feel like that was probably the most scared I've ever been was watching it when I was 5 years old. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah. That
also
was
think,
rough.
and I also think that that's a reason why adults um, like horror movies, and horror movies are becoming a bigger thing, like Killer and stuff. I think we're all trying to get back to that point when we were kids and we got scared. We want, and I also think that's another reason why I like thriller type horror, or the horror that's not like in your face. It's kind of the darker ambiance to it has
Mhm.
become a thing recently because I think that scares adults or creeps adults out more now. Because I mean, slashers now they're just all right. Well, we're just gonna come here. We're just coming here for the gore. We're just coming here for a fun time. So you're not really getting scared by it. And I think that's why like Jason, the last handful of Jason movies didn't work anymore because it's like you're not scared of it anymore. It was the first two or three were kind of scary because every state has that legend of there's a lake out there where people camp and people have been murdered there, but I just don't think that works. I don't
Yeah.
think that works anymore. So uh, but yeah, we try to search out those more subtle, and I think that's why I like my wife's favorite thing to watch is like ghost type stuff, like The
Mm.
Conjuring and things like that. Um, but I also like when like I like alien stuff because I'm like, it could happen. I mean, I'm not ruling out the possibility or anything. If you're going to give me anything with Bigfoot, yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I'm a crypto nerd, so it's like, all right, evil Bigfoot killing people out there. I'm down for it.
Yeah, it is. There's so many great movies now out there, and something I noticed I wanted to ask you about is I've noticed a few authors recently have been making playlists for the movies with music. Have you thought about doing that for your book?
A music playlist or
Hmm. Like a Spotify playlist. They'll make a playlist on the website, or they'll share it on
oh,
social media, and it'll be like you either music they were listening to while they wrote it, or music that they associate with the book for
uh,
readers to listen to while they read.
yeah, on Twitter we've went back and forth with people about like, oh, do you listen to music or what type of music do you listen to? And honestly, when I'm writing, I can't listen to music. Like if I'm actually in the process of typing or whatever, I can't because I don't know, it just throws me off. But I have um, there are certain like songs that I'm like, okay, if I in the past I've put them out on Twitter or whatever music videos, and I'm like, if you want to get a feel for what the book's about or how I'm like, or as I was writing, I would give people updates. I'm like, oh, if you want a feeling of what I was feeling today while I was writing, here, um, yeah, I'm trying to think, uh, what is there's a song that I posted um, the the third book, the book that I'm going to start writing. Um, oh gosh, do you know the band Atreyu by
Yeah,
chance? Yeah, they have a new song that just came out called Warrior, and I'm like, just heard that, I'm like, yes, that's the beginning of the third book. That or a lot of Falling in Reverse. I and Starset. I
mm.
listened to a lot of those. Um, a lot of them kind of influenced more than a vampire. When I was listening, they have a song called "Raised by the Wolves," and when I listen to that, I like because I was an athlete growing up, and you'd always listen to songs that get you pumped up before, and that's kind of what I do. Like, but yeah, that's a good idea. I might try to make a playlist or something and throw that out there. But that's a big thing for me is like I like listening to things that'll get me pumped, and, pumped up because my books are shorter, you know, and they kind of build in pace. So the very beginning's a little slow, and then it gets faster, and it gets faster. And when my friend first read it, he's like, man, those last two chapters, I felt like you were just foot to the accelerator, you know. Um, but that's so those are I know some people will like to have like slow music to kind of I maybe open them up a little bit, but I'm more of like, all right, let's get into this, let's get going because most of my characters, and like we've talked earlier about being comic book and superheroes and stuff, and a lot of these characters are going to kind of they're going to kind of cross over, and it's going to feel like like they're heroes or superheroes in a way, but just, in a darker universe. So that's, when you think about, heroes and superheroes, you think about, more like, all right, more cinematic type music. And my friend, he used to send me, and he'll still do it from time to time. He'll go through, because he listens to music all the time. He'll send me something, whether it's, just instrumental or whatever, like, hey, what do you see? Because we used to play this game where he would send me a song, or he'd play a song in front of me, and he'd be like, all right, tell me a story. And I'd be like, I'm like, okay, it's a 2 minute song or whatever. I'm like, oh, somebody's getting chased through the city, and then and then this happens, and then they, or somebody's, it's like a building song. It's like, oh, it sounds like, somebody's getting ready to go out into battle, and and I would tell them like short, like 2 minute stories from the 2 minute song. So,
Hmm.
He's kind of, and that's one way he kind of kept my imagination going over the years by still doing those things. So, I think I've in the book, I thanked him for that. Like keeping my imagination alive, and now, it's weird, especially if you're a fantasy writer, or if you're trying to write. I assume comic book writers have this problem too. It's like you can't turn it off. You just have all these ideas.
Yeah.
I want to put them. I want to keep putting them out there. Uh, so I always have ideas running in my head, and kind of more fast paced, rock songs. Is what I listen to a lot,
Uh,
especially when I want to be in the writing mood.
yeah. It's funny how different people respond to different types of music and different stimuli.
Oh, and there's a song called um, it's called it's fallen in reverse. The drug in me is you reimagined. He reimagined the song that he wrote like 10 years ago, and he put a crazy expensive music video to it. But the way he remade it, I'm like, that's the book in a nutshell. I'm like, I remember posting that. I was like, yeah, if you want to know what it feels like to read the book, listen to that song.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
So I do have, before I let you go, I do have three more questions for you. My last three questions.
Okay.
I'm trying to get a couple of questions that are like mainstays. So they're kind of fun questions. So the first question is, and this is a newly added question to that list, thanks to Catherine Silva, is if the zombie apocalypse happened today, what would be your weapon of choice?
Ooh. Oh man. Well, um, uh, again, again, zombies are my wife's favorite thing in the whole world. She told me that I had to tell you about Brian King, and you have to read it, or she's gonna kill me. Um,
Okay.
so he's like the master of zombies. But so, have you ever played Dying Light?
No. I've seen it. I don't think I've played it.
Yeah, so there's sections in this game where you can get into at night that have like lights, and fences, and they're called safe zones. So we'll be driving down the road, and my wife will just point something out and be like, safe zone. So we've been doing that for years now. But I thought too much about this.
Okay.
So the perfect warriors of all time to deal with zombies would be the Spartans, right? So you got the shields, just and the phalanx, and then so the spear with some kind of like a stop sign contraption made into a shield. That would be the perfect zombie killing weapon because you keep them at distance, just stab them in the head. If another one gets close to you while you're stabbing that one, you just hit it and then just keep going. So yeah,
Nice.
some kind of maybe a wooden uh, a wooden push broom handle carved up.
It's a good
That,
answer.
that's your overly thought answer to that question.
Nice. I like that one. It's usually ranged weapons or other, well, there have been a few closer hack and slash type of weapons, but I like that. I like that
Yeah,
with the
I
shield.
mean, a gun, guns would be great, but eventually gonna run out of bullets. You got to go find the bullets. Uh, Not many people can make bullets, so I'm thinking eventually you're gonna run out of ammunition, and you're gonna have to use some kind of closer range weapon. Be
And
prepared.
yeah, the second question is, and you mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but what was your first job?
First job was movie gallery, which for people who are under 30, they may not have any idea. Um, but we used to do years ago when you wanted to watch a movie, you used to have to go to a store, and but yeah, it was the biggest competitor to Blockbuster, and I spent the better part of my childhood going into movie gallery because we didn't have a Blockbuster in the town I lived in. Uh, I lived in I lived in Circleville for years and years, and we didn't have a Blockbuster, so movie gallery was it. And I was in there so much, and I read it. I probably have watched 80% of the movies in the building, and I would rack up crazy fees, you know, but they would always just wipe them away. They're like, we know you're not gonna steal the movie. You're always gonna be back in here. And I knew eventually I was probably gonna work in there. And once I got in there, I seen what they had. I had like 20 profiles in their system because you can't just delete the file, so they would create a new profile for me. But yeah, it was my first job and still my favorite job I've ever had. Like if there was still money in it, I would own one. I mean, uh, and the biggest one thing I'm always sad about, like with Blockbuster being gone, is I used to have the unlimited game rental. It was like 25 bucks a month, and you could just go in and rent games. And I can't tell you how many times I would go and rent a game and just like play it for an hour and be like, this is horrible, and just walk back down the street and go get a new game. And now, I mean, there's Game Pass and stuff like that, but it's not the same. You don't have as wide a variety, and yeah. So that was my first job, and it is still the best job I've ever had.
Nice. Yeah, those fun times to be had in those old video stores. And the next question I have for you is, if you were in my position, was there a question that you would have asked that I didn't ask?
Ooh, that's a deep question. Um,
I'm trying to improve my repertoire, so.
yeah. Maybe. Uh, well, you might ask in the future, and I'll answer this for you too. And if and maybe I know you like to switch your stuff up, so maybe you do ask this from time to time. But maybe what are the first book that got you into wanting to write, or the first book that inspired you? Uh, and for me, the answer to that question is Eaters of the Dead by Michael
Mm,
Crichton,
good answer.
because I was, we said I was more of a movie person when I was younger than a book person. But that book just hooked me. And and again, it was because it was an accessible book. Like, you know, um, it was, I think it's like 200 pages, 230 pages, something like that. And Crichton did that a lot for the longest time. Most of his books, he's written like, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 books. And like the first 20 of them were like that. They're under
Hmm.
300 pages. But yeah, Eaters of the Dead is just, and it gave me a lot of things where I looked up. I'm like, okay, so who is this? He wrote it so much that it was like, it was this a real event? Is he just retelling it? And it's a mixture. If you hadn't read it before,
No, I need. It's one of those books I've always wanted to and just never gotten to.
yeah, it's a, and they made it into the 13th Warrior. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
seen the movie.
I have. I love the movie. I just haven't.
Oh,
Yeah, read the book. Yeah.
underrated, yeah. Um, but yeah, it's basically there was a manuscript that this guy, he's from the Middle East. I don't know what country it was, but his name was like Ivan Fadlan. I don't know if I'm probably butchering it. Um, but yeah, like the first half of the book is almost retelling that, and then the second half is Michael Crichton going, "Okay, I'm going to tell you my version of Beowulf almost."
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
and I was just like, this is the first time I ever just got a book and I didn't want to put it down because most of the time, especially in high school, it was like, uh, okay, 3 pages, let's put this like, or if I got through a chapter or two in a book, and this is still to the extent where it's like with these longer books, it's hard. I'm getting better at it, obviously, but to push through monotonous parts of books, especially these 800, 900,000 page books, and you're like, okay, the monotonous part of a short book might be like 4 or 5 pages. Monotonous, when the book's 1,000 pages, you might have 2 chapters where you're not invested in anything that's going on, but you're just like, all right, I know there's going to be more good parts, so let's pass through it. But and that's when I was a kid, it was to the extreme. So it's like if you didn't keep me hooked for 5 pages, we're done. But that was the first book was like where I'm like I don't even want to do my schoolwork. I want to read. I want to put it underneath my desk and keep reading it. Um, and I just think Crichton does did a great job at that. And he's an inspiration to me because I plan on jumping around I'm keeping all of my books in this same universe, but they're going to be some of them are going to be in different times in different areas with different characters. And he was just able to come up with new great idea after new great idea, and I'm like, how do you do that? Like, how do you have all these different Congo that
Yeah.
Andromeda Strain, Eaters of the Dead? I mean, he can go from super high tech to medieval and you know Jurassic Park, and it's like, come
Yeah. It's almost not fair.
yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
some people, and again, like I said, my friend thinks I'm that way. I'm like, I'm nowhere near as good as some of these people are, with coming up ideas. I mean, hopefully down the road, I become one of those people that people can say that about. But we shall
One
see.
one book at a time.
Yeah. That's why I tell people, you know, one word at a time, one day at a time. You just keep writing, and you'll have a book out. And for any writers who you know are watching this and they're thinking it's a tall task to write a book. And if you think about it, you're like, oh, 300 pages. Well, if you write, you know, if you write 300 words a day, you'll have a full length novel in 1 year. 300 words. That's all you got to write. And honestly, it doesn't even. I mean, you know, maybe sitting and writing 300 words straight for some people is hard, but if every time you take a 5 minute break, you write 15 words, boom, here, there. And that's kind of how I do it. Is I don't have time to just 2 hours to sit and write, so it's chunk, 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 chunk all the way through the day.
Yeah. Chip away at it. One day at a time is some of the best advice I've ever been given. Just little by little.
Yeah, You just gotta, and that's my mentality is I don't have all the I don't have all the free time in the world, and I don't have all the money in the world, but I can
Yeah.
grind as anybody. So
Yeah.
one, like you said, one day at a time. We'll just keep going, and uh, especially especially with the content you're putting out, like you know it may be slow, but I think eventually you're gonna catch on, and you're gonna have a ton of followers here in no time.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm
Yeah,
having fun, so
yeah, it's great, man. I love everything that you're putting out.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I try to make it thoughtful and worth listening to, but it's not for everyone. But I enjoy it, so
Yeah,
as long as someone's watching.
yeah, and I love how you have this like group that you kind of keep in, and you know and all since you all work together, it's like one person sucks one person in, and that's and I mean I don't know where I originally seen you, but I think it was on a group discussion somewhere. I seen you and I was like, oh, this guy's interesting, and then I got into you, and then I've seen you bring other people in, and then I start watching some of their content. I'm like, Steve, why do you do this to
Yeah, I don't have time for this crap.
me? Take me down the rabbit hole. I'm supposed to be reading right now, and now I'm on YouTube.
Yeah, you end up going just you go on this ride and you end up all these
Yeah,
different channels and
yeah, we call
books and discussions.
we call it wiki walking, like where you you went on wiki to look up George Washington, and now by the time you're done with it, you're looking at Briggs and Stratton engines on riding lawnmowers. You're like, how did these connect? Why am I on here? Yeah,
What do I do with my life?
I came on here to listen about horror books, and now I'm listening to this book about Keanu Reeves, how to marry Keanu Reeves or something. I'm like, what the heck? You just, you know, all tangents.
Well, if someone wanted to find you and find your work and find out more about you or connect with you, where would they go? How can they connect with you?
All right. So the easiest way to find me is on Twitter, and it's at uh, Joseph Joseph Carroll 87. At some point, I'll probably change that to be more on brand. But that's where they can find me. You can find me on Facebook. I have an author page. It's J.R. Carroll. You can find me there. Then my website is josephrcarroll.com, and I try to keep that updated. I think my wife, she's the more tech than I am, so she deals with that. But yeah, we'll uh, keep people updated there, and soon we'll be, maybe doing some merch once my name gets out there a little bit more. She's the one that actually had that made up. That's the cover on canvas. That was a present to me. So,
Oh, it's super cool. Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. Yeah, it's really nice. It's great.
but yeah, we're collectors. So the other one is a Dresden alternative cover for my favorite book of all time, Changes. But
Nice.
yeah, we got all kinds of weird stuff like that out on my bookshelf. But yeah, Twitter's the easiest place. I try to I try to interact if anybody messages me on there or comments. I try to comment back as much as I can. And then I'm trying to build the Facebook page up, but I mean, I have personal Instagrams and stuff, but that's the hardest thing is doing multiple things. I'd love to have a YouTube channel too, but you know, time,
Time.
time. Eventually somebody's going to create a pill where you only have to sleep 2 hours and you'll get a full 8 hours sleep, and then I'll have every social media. So Twitter's the easiest way to contact me.
Nice. Well, I know we've been planning on this for a while, so thanks for accepting the invite and coming by and chatting this morning.
Oh man, it was all my pleasure. I'm glad to be on here, and anytime, anytime when the next book comes out, I'll send it your way too.
Yeah, well, you can't tell me anytime because then I'll be bothering you to come back. So be
And man,
careful with that.
this was a blast.
Okay.
Anytime you need an extra person to take up time.
Hey, well, you're welcome anytime. You let me know. We'll work something out. I'd like to come back and talk about the book when I read it next month. So we'll set something up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for watching, and thanks again, Joseph, for taking the time.
See y'all soon.